As the buffalo disappeared and Native Americans were cleared from the plains, cattle ranching became predominant in the Great Plains. From Texas to Kansas, ranching became a profitable business. Settlers had to learn how to manage large herds of cattle on the open range. Americans learned how to herd the large Texas Longhorns from Mexican ranchers. Everything about the American cowboy, from the clothing to the vocabulary, was directly influenced by Spanish and Mexican ranchers who had worked that territory in the past. Spurs and chaps were worn by the Mexican cowboys, and words such as bronco, mustang, and rodeo were all directly derived from the Spanish language. As railroads began crossing the Great Plains, the demand for beef across the country rose. Ranchers from Texas herded their cattle to railroads in Missouri to transport the cattle into Chicago and then to eastern cities. A new route was needed, however. In 1867, Illinois cattle dealer Joseph McCoy made Abilene, Kansas, a cattle town. After building cattle pens and a hotel, McCoy helped survey what became known as the Chisholm Trail. The Chisholm Trail was the major cattle route from San Antonio, Texas, through Oklahoma, and into Kansas. The first year of the Chisholm Trail, around 35,000 heads of cattle were driven down the trail. The next year, that number rose to 75,000. To keep up with demand, ranchers hired cowboys to drive their cattle to Abilene. The era of the Chisholm Trail was the heyday of the American cowboy. As many as 55,000 cowboys worked the plains between 1866 and 1885. Around 25% of American cowboys were African Americans, and a further 12% were Mexican. However, the popular image seen of cowboys in movies and TVs was a romanticized myth. In reality, cowboys worked 10 to 14-hour days on a ranch and 14 or more hours a day on the trail. Some cowboys were as young as 15, but rarely were cowboys near 40 years of age. In spring, cowboys would take the cattle along what was known as the long drive. The journey from Texas to Abilene took around 3 months. Drives would include one cowboy for about every 250 to 300 cows. During the long drive, cowboys were on horseback from sunup to sundown. Cowboys slept on the ground and bathed in rivers. Life on the drive was dangerous, especially due to river crossings, lightning, and the possibility of a stampede. The late 1880s saw an end to the open range and the American cowboy. Weather patterns helped wipe out large herds, resulting in ranchers choosing to focus on smaller herds with higher quality meat. The main reason the open trail was closed, however, was due to an invention by Illinois farmer Joseph Glidden: barbed wire. Cheap and easy to make and use, barbed wire allowed ranchers to fence in the Great Plains and therefore ending the long drives and the American cowboy's way of life. The main reason settlers were able to move west in the numbers and speed with which they did was the expansion of railroads to the west. From 1850 to 1871, the U.S. government gave land grants to railroads, some 170 million acres. In the 1860s, two railroads raced to lay tracks across the country. The Central Pacific moved eastward from Sacramento, California, and the Union Pacific moved westward from Omaha, Nebraska. The railroads were laid by Civil War veterans, African Americans, Irish, Chinese immigrants, and Mexican Americans. In the spring of 1869, both railroads met in Utah and the Transcontinental Railroad was complete. A major pull to the west was the availability of land. In 1862, Congress passed the Homestead Act. The act offered 160 acres of land free to any citizen who was the head of the household. All that the family needed to do was work or to farm the land. From 1862 to 1900, around 600,000 families took advantage of the offer. Several thousand of these settlers were exodusters. Exodusters were African Americans who moved from the post-Reconstruction South to Kansas. In 1889, the government gave away land in what is now Oklahoma. In less than 1 day, settlers claimed nearly 2 million acres in what was a massive land rush. Some land, however, was taken before the government officially declared the land open. Because many settlers claimed land sooner than they were supposed to, Oklahoma became known as the Sooner State. Creating a homestead in the Great Plains was a challenge. For one, trees were scarce, resulting in a need to use the land to create shelter. Settlers built sod homes, called a soddy, out of bricks made from the plains turf, or they built dugout shelters from the ground. Additionally, farming the land was a struggle. Mass markets for John Deere's steel plow and Cyrus McCormick's reaping machine opened up as farmers moved into the plains. Other machines were invented during this era to make farming easier and more efficient as well. The federal government assisted farmers through the promotion of agricultural education. The Morrill Act of 1862 and 1890 gave federal land to states to help create agricultural universities. However, new machinery was expensive, and many farmers went into debt in order to stay competitive in the market. Additionally, the railroads that transported farm goods created difficulties for farmers. Railroad companies created bonanza farms, which were large single-crop farms. To stay competitive, small farmers needed more land and often went into debt to purchase more land. Also, railroads set the prices for shipping grain to eastern markets. Farmers began to believe they were being taken advantage of by the railroads. The challenging conditions they faced would result in farmers uniting for a common cause.